Alrighty. I don't see any other stragglers, so I think we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Earthjustice's panel on the harmful impacts of dirty mining to Indigenous communities, as well as solutions for a clean energy future. My name is Yasmin Smalley-Norman. I'm a marketing manager here at Earthjustice. And I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined here in person by Lindsay Muzio, our senior marketing specialist, as well as Eric Dunn, our the operations director of Wild Scenic Film Festival, who's helping us out today, and as well as our lovely in-person audience. We also have our terrific panelists on Zoom, who I'll introduce in just a moment, as well as an online audience on Zoom. So we'll be interspersing your questions between our in-person and online audience in a little bit. So seems like we've solved all of our technical difficulties, but bear with us as we want to get the word out to as many people as possible for this important topic. We'll have around 30 minutes of discussion today, first with our panelists, and then we'll open up for our Q&A session. And for folks in person, I'll likely just have you raise your hands if you have a question, and then I'll intersperse those with questions from our Zoom audience. So without any further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce our panelists. We're joined today by Dr. Martina Dawley, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Hualapai Tribe. Hi, Martina. Thanks for being here. We're also joined by Laura Berglan, the Senior Attorney at Earthjustice. Hi, Laura. As well as Blaine Miller-McFeeley, Senior Legislative Representative at Earthjustice. Hi, Blaine. So before I turn it over to our panelists with some questions, I'd like to first start off and share some context about the damaging effects of dirty mining to Indigenous communities. And that's dirty mining that's specifically for minerals that are key to the energy transition. And the transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a clean energy essential is really essential for the planet and for its species. This much needed transition relies upon an assortment of minerals to fuel the shift, many of which are extracted from the earth in harmful ways. So the clean energy technologies that we rely on today and that we need to scale very rapidly, such as lithium-ion batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, these are all currently made from minerals that must be either dug or leached out of the ground or recovered from recycled materials. Demand for some of these minerals, such as graphite, lithium, cobalt, is expected to grow by 400 to 500% by the year 2050 to meet the demand that we're seeing for the clean energy transition. Unfortunately, mining operations today are currently governed by the 1872 mining law that hasn't been updated in over 150 years. So as the mining industry co-opts the clean energy transition into a push for more poorly regulated mining, new sacrifice zones will be created, especially around Indigenous communities. So of the minerals that are considered really key for that clean energy transition, 97% of nickel, 89% of copper, 79% of lithium, and 68% of cobalt are found within 35 miles of a Native American reservation. We can't avoid all mining, but what we can do is make sure that any mining that does occur must not be on special or sacred places and must be done in the most sustainable way possible with strong protections for the environment and consent for impacted communities. So to start, I'd like to have Martina kick us off. Martina, could you provide some context on the Sandy Valley project in Arizona and how the exploration for lithium mining is threatening the Hualapai Tribe's sacred spring?
Thank you, Yasmin. Yeah, our sacred spring, we call it Hakamwe, and it is located within our ancestral territory. And currently, the Bureau of Land Management is considering approving a lithium mining exploration project on BLM land that surrounds our sacred spring. And they refer to that project as the Big Sandy Incorporate Sandy Valley Exploration Project, Phase 3. And Phase 3 is, it's considered Phase 3 because they've already done some exploratory drilling. And like you said, with the 1872 mining law, the mining companies are allowed to hire exploration companies to go in and do some exploration drilling, as long as it's less than 5 acres. And that also includes the roadways going into the site. And so they've done that. They've staked their claims on a very large area, which is very frustrating, and it surrounds that spring. So the spring, it's a sacred medicinal spring where Native people, not just Hualapai, but Native people from the surrounding area had been coming since time immemorial. And our people have gone there to carry out ceremonies related to birth, young women's coming of age, and other life transitions. And most important, it's described in our ceremonial song cycle called the Salt Song Trail, which we still sing today. It is a very important and sacred song that is sung, and we keep that within our traditional values, because without that, that really affects who we are as a people. And, to really understand the threat, the waters from the spring interconnect with the surrounding landscape and the aquifers. So, with other countries and other places that had to deal with lithium mining, the threat is water loss, ground destabilization, biodiversity loss, and contaminated soil and toxic waste. So, for example, it would probably more than likely take up to 2 million liters of water for 1 ton of lithium. And that's just from looking at literature through, on online and, from our legal experts. And once they do that, they create these ponds, and those ponds carry toxic waste that can consist of toxic waste material such as potassium, magnesium, borax, and lithium salts. And that's just really, really bad for the earth, and it would cause a very unhealthy environment. And, we just have to really face reality. We are in a drought. So the question has always been, where is that water coming from? So that's what's going on in our area here in Arizona. Our ancestral territories are very vast. So our northern border is the Colorado River to the north, and to the west, the western reaches of the Colorado River, and it extends all the way down to the Bill Williams River, which is south of the Big Sandy Valley. And it goes out into the east along like I-17 area. So it's huge. And this is really close and dear to me because I am from the Big Sandy Band, and that is part of my direct ancestral landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And you make a really good point in that by sourcing minerals for the clean energy transition, we don't want to at the same time cause new environmental problems related to drought, related to some of the toxic effluents. So thank you. And we've got our behind the scenes person on Zoom sharing some helpful resources in the Zoom chat. And then for our in-person audience, if any of our folks here would like to help us fight to protect Indigenous sites, You can text the word protect to our number at 43428, and that will send you to a link to sign an action alert to tell President Biden to respect and protect these sacred sites. So again, that's the word protect to 43428. Laura, I'd like to ask you this next question. How is Earthjustice involved in this fight against lithium mining, and specifically the Sandy Valley project in Arizona? And how's it going?
Thanks, Yasmin. I want to follow up on what Martina was just speaking about. We're in a phase 3 situation here. So they're sort of proposing something beyond a notice level. So they had to do an environmental assessment. So that was published in 2021 in the summer, and Earthjustice picked up a Hualapai Tribe and have the honor of representing the Hualapai Tribe at that time. And I should give a shout out as well. The Western Mining Action Project also co-counsels with us in this matter. So we did some extensive comments on that draft environmental assessment. One huge issue is this is on BLM land. So BLM land adjacent to tribal lands is where the project is being proposed. And the BLM did no tribal consultation with the tribe about the impacts of Hockamway or any other issue prior to the publication of that EA. So that's something that we don't believe is consistent with their guidance, consistent with Executive Order 13175 or any other guidance coming out of the administration. So that was a huge concern for the tribe. They've done no studies about impact of any of these drilling sites on the spring itself, whether or not it's going to impact flow, impact temperature, any of these things, and things that would be key to its medicinal qualities. So we pointed all of these things out in our comments. We also asked that the tribe be allowed to become a cooperating agency, which is a process that's provided for under the National Environmental Policy Act. So again, these EAs, EISs are part of what we call NEPA, and cooperating agencies is a status that can be granted to cities, counties, tribes to provide that input that they might have specialty knowledge in. So particular to the tribe, of course, they're the ones that most intimately understand the spring and its medicinal qualities and the importance in the culture. But the tribe was denied that again and again, that status. Over a year and a half, we asked on behalf of the tribe to become a cooperating agency, and the BLM basically said, well, if this moves forward to an actual mine, then the tribe could be a cooperating agency at that point. And certainly the tribe doesn't want to see this move forward to a mine and wants to ensure that the BLM is fully informed of the impacts here at this stage so that it doesn't continue to move forward. So some meetings kept going forward, things like that. We'd also asked that an environmental impact statement be drafted instead of an environmental assessment. So a more extensive report on the impacts of this, because I think you haven't looked at the cumulative impacts of previous drilling. This isn't the only drilling site in the area. The Sandy Valley is this location of a number of different claims subject to other what we call notice level exploration that's going on currently. So what are the impact of all of these different holes having on the spring itself? So for all these reasons and the huge impacts, if the spring was dewatered or reduced flow or impacted temperature, we believe that an EIS needs to be completed. We also asked, if they weren't inclined to move forward with an EIS, to at least put the EA back out for public comment, especially given the fact that the tribe had not been given that opportunity to have any kind of consultation before the first draft EA was produced. Initially, we were told no. So fast forward to early December 2022, the Tribal Nations Summit occurred. A number of items specific to tribes came out of the administration. One of those things that came out were some some directives that are sort of preview, and I'll let Blaine talk about this a little bit more. The interagency working group on mining reform has assembled, and they're going to make some recommendations about reforming the 1872 mining law. So they sort of pulled out some of these tribal recommendations from that IWG, and both the secretaries of USDA and of Department of Interior then made some directives specific to tribes. And one of those is that tribes should be made cooperating agencies when they're in mining projects, when their rights are impacted. So we actually had already had some Hill meetings scheduled, brought this issue up, and the next day we got a letter saying that the tribe could become a cooperating agency. So that's great news. We're sort of in that process now. So we're hopeful that the tribe is able to have that input that they should be able to as an expert on the spring and its uses.
Thank you, Laura. And you mentioned a couple different tactics in there, environmental impact assessment versus report, really pushing to make tribes included in the process much earlier before mining is ever even an issue. How can some of those tactics, or how can the strategy be adopted by other communities?
Sure, thanks, Yasmin. I think getting involved early is important. First, assessing what permits are needed here. So whether or not any kind of water permit is needed. Frequently when there are mines, you might need a Clean Water Act Section 404 permit. So just figuring out what all permits that you need and the timelines there. If there are state permits that are needed, frequently those have very short timelines. So you just need to, be aware of those and get involved in those processes early. These are typically record review cases, what we call. So you need to have all of your information there before the agency makes its decision. So if you don't agree, for example, that for example, pumping is not going to have any impact on the water level, something like that, and you're not agreeing with that, you need to get your expert and any information that you have into the record before the agency makes that decision, so that all of that information is there if you ever decide to challenge it moving forward. So involvement early, making sure you're understanding all the permits, and that you've got your expert on board early.
Gotcha. Thanks, Laura. And we understand that we're in the heart of a very similar problem here with the proposed reopening of the Idaho-Maryland gold mine just minutes away in Grass Valley. So the fight against damaging mining operations, unfortunately, is not unique. So those are good tactics to keep in mind. Thank you for sharing that. Let's go to Blaine. Question for you. Let's talk about mining reform. What needs to change on a national level from current laws and regulations, i.e. that 1872 General Mining Act, to protect Indigenous sites and other threatened areas?
Thanks, Yasmin. And yeah, I'll put this in the context of, we're talking about two mines, right? But these issues of people having their voices heard, or the lack thereof, is time and time again across every state. Basically every county in the West virtually is dealing with this. And it's based off of, exactly as you say, this 1872 mining law, which is basically the base of the problem that all of these mines are creating. And just to give this a little bit of context, it is 1872, has been mentioned several times. That was Ulysses S. Grant that signed that law. So, and the other important thing about that date, it was signed into law the year after we stopped treaty making with Native American tribes. So what we know that the purpose of this law was to settle, quote, settle the West, to colonize the western part of the United States, and to kick Indigenous peoples off their lands that they had should rightfully be on. So just in context, this is a racist law that the whole point of it was to get white people out to the West. And so what that meant is, I think you heard this Martina talk about this, is they literally put a stake in the ground to say that we get the minerals that are under there. This is very different than the process that's used in oil and gas or coal mining, for example, where it is a leasing process where they get to choose where the agency, whether that's Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service and so forth, gets to say, okay, here's maybe a more appropriate place to mine or not. That's the way it works in oil and gas. That is not the way it works in mining. The mining companies, foreign, many of them foreign, some not, but would literally go put a stake in the ground and say, those are the minerals under there. They have to walk down to the BLM, hand a form in basically, and they get to start that process. As talked about, under 5 acres, they can start to look for stuff that's under there. So what we have to do is we have to reform this law if we want to actually give communities, Indigenous peoples, the right to actually say what is sacred, what is special, what is too sacred or special of a place to mine. And so there's sort of 3 components of what we have to do to reform this. I talked about the discretion that the Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service have. We have to change that. We have to put this into something like a leasing system that allows the decisions to be made upfront with community consultation and community voices and free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous communities to say, this is too sacred of a place. We need to mine somewhere else. And the leasing of that helps us choose that up front and make those decisions up front, as opposed to finding out that there's a mine in our backyard, after the process has already started, which is almost always the case. So that's piece 1, is that sort of discretion about actually where to choose, be able to choose and protect those sacred and special places. The second is there is no federal royalty paid by mining companies on federal lands right now. What that means is that for 150 years, mining companies have been getting a free lunch for just frankly destroying and pulling out minerals out of our lands, out of what is supposed to be the taxpayers' lands on BLM Forest Service. They don't pay a federal royalty. So we should, unlike oil and gas or coal, who does? So we have to fix that. And the last major piece that has to be reformed and has to be changed is how we make sure that the mining that does occur is actually cleaned up. There is estimated to be 500,000 abandoned mines across the country right now that are giving cancer to kids, that are destroying drinking water and so much more. And our Superfund system, which is the system that taxpayers support to clean up sites, abandoned mines and other sites, has not even close to enough money, because mining companies, in large part, leave town before things are cleaned up, because the system for reclamation, the cleanup system, is so riddled with loopholes that they leave town and leave the cleanup to the local communities, to the states, and most of the time it's not able to be done. So we need to set up a reclamation fee and a system that actually enforces, doesn't allow mining companies to leave. One way they often do this is that they will set up a subsidiary that will go bankrupt and leave town, and there's nobody that we can chase down to pay for that cleanup. So those 3 pieces have to be reformed if we actually want a sustainable mining system in the United States. And again, to tie this back to, this is about these minerals that we use in clean energy. We think that there are certain places that there should be no mining allowed, too special and sacred, but where it does happen, needs to have these things, right? A royalty, a cleanups requirements, and so forth. So the last thing I'll say is in regards to what Laura was talking about, this interagency working group. So what I was just talking about is the law, which is again 1872 law. There are regulations, federal regulations that sort of go under that and do the details and enforcement of that. We have to update those too. Those are also super antiquated. Updating those is not going to fix every single problem in the law, but it will be able to make a big difference in things like exactly what we were, Laura and Martina were just talking about, which is having consultation and true voices heard from the Indigenous communities in the consultation process and so forth. So there are vast improvements can be made through regulations. We expect this interagency working group, which President Biden put together to examine what regulations and the law, what changes in regulations and law should be made this spring. And so our hope is that those recommendations are going to call for some of the changes that we were just talking through. And then eventually those regulatory changes will be made. We need obviously a lot of pressure and voices to be spoken out from everyone to actually do that. But that is what we sort of hope is the next step is the regulations that underlie this law will be updated to give more protections to communities and choices to communities.
Thank you, Blaine. And your comment about mining and harmful and damaging practices not being a feature of, unfortunately, the two cases, the Idaho Maryland mine or the Sandy Valley project, but really being in every zip code rings true. There's a number of films here talking about mining, and I was just chatting with a filmmaker this morning about his work, and he said, "Oh, I'd love to talk to Earthjustice about lithium mining in New York State." And I'm like, "Well, it's everywhere. Unfortunately, it's becoming a very very hot topic." So mining regulation is definitely needed. Thank you for walking us through that. I'd love to now shift to the clean energy transition and the need to really ethically and responsibly source minerals needed for lithium batteries and other clean energy technologies. And Martina, I'd love to hear from you. In addition to the strategies that Blaine mentioned, how do we really need to frame this transition to make sure that we're not repeating some of the mistakes of the past and the current mistakes?
Thank you. Thank you, Blaine. That was really a great overview of the law. And yeah, it's going to take a considerable amount of education on everyone's, for everyone, including the companies and the corporations. And, first and foremost, this, land, United States was built off of the backs and the blood of, all people coming here, especially Native people. And the histories that, we all know and learned, in high school, we have the same history books, do not include Indian law and policy. And in the law libraries, there are shelves and shelves of Indian law and policy. And it's not included into the American laws because there's a lot in there that gives us the rights to what, we had pretty much given up so that we are able to survive. And the land that we're on now, our reservation lands, are considerably small compared to our ancestral territories. So it's really important that the BLM, is held accountable for caring for the land. It's not just the BLM, it's the Forest Service, it's the different federal agencies that are being held up to a high standard to take care of the environment. And right now, the big push and what, people are allowed to do on these lands are, mining, development, and recreation. And a lot of those, types of activities, well, those actual types of activities do not provide any kind of protection to the land, to the water. So when you're thinking about, how do we move forward without, doing what we've done in the past, there's going to be a lot of just re-education and assertiveness on our part to be heard, because Blaine had mentioned the word sacred, and these places that are very sacred. And what comes up with that is that now agencies are coming up with another term called untangible, and that's really frustrating. For the past 100 years, we've been explaining to the agencies what sacred means, and just as current, as recently as a couple of months ago, I'm in a meeting with agencies, and they said, well, we want to know what does sacred mean. And it was really frustrating. It was extremely condescending. It was extremely offensive, because how dare someone who looks at the land that they came onto try to tell us to explain our tradition and our sacredness, when their way of coming onto the land is based on their Christianity and their God. And that is something you can't see either. And to claim it as such, and saying this is God's land, and using that type of terminology is extremely what is the word, hypocritical. It's very hypocritical. And you have to remember the components of what we go through in order to be American citizens. We have to dress a certain way. We have to be able to understand the government. We have to speak English. And most importantly, we have to be Christians. And that has been something that has been a part of us. A lot of people don't know this, but in order for us to actually have a reservation, there's a underlying requirement that there must be some type of Christian church on our reservation in order for us to continue assimilating into becoming Americans. And so there's a lot of history there that is completely left out in the history books. It's left out for anybody and everybody's educational purposes to understand that as an Indigenous person, as a Native person to this land, we have every right to be angry, every right to feel ignored, and every right to say, you're destroying the land. And when we talk about, the Salt Trail songs, it's not just about singing a song and rejoicing or celebrating. These songs talk about the springs, they talks about the waterway, it talks about the landscape, it talks about the animals. And many times, the researchers that come out to take a look at the land and make the decisions for BLM, whether or not it's an adverse effect, they ignore all of that. And then they create these really condescending ways of treating us like, things are, spiritual, the way they interpret our belief system. And so that really creates that that sidebar, so many of our what we say becomes a sidebar and is put aside. So those songs are not just about wishing and thinking about the land. They're important words because we come from a very oral tradition. So they're telling us to take care of the land. We're I hate the word ethno. I just want to get rid of the vocabulary. We're botanists, we're biologists, we're anthropologists, we know how to observe. And growing up, people would ask me, who is your favorite anthropologist? And I would say my mom, because she observes, she sees everything, she knows everything, she knows everyone. And I learned how to observe human behavior through my mom. And, it's just that, she doesn't have a degree, having a degree is so highly valued within our American system. And that is what really creates a lot of problems, because our people who are in political power, some people who are in the legal system, people, the researchers, the people who work for BLM, they do not have any educational component to who, the Native peoples are and where they are working. And I've actually been on field visits with BLM archaeologists that had no clue, didn't know anything about our removal, the different bands, where we come from. And it's really hurtful, because they're supposed to come out here to take care of the land. And when you look at their website, they talk about environmental, care. They talk about, the plants and everything, but that, they don't practice what they preach. And, the drilling activity that they already did, we walked out there, we went out there, and it was a mess. Trees were knocked down. There are still big holes in the ground, and they just left it like that. And, with this 1872 mining law, it's really old, and it just comes from a very, very old-fashioned way of being extremely inconsiderate and not caring about the environment, because it's going to always be there. And let's just throw trash everywhere because somebody else will clean it up. It's not our problem. And just just knowing that these foreign companies are coming in and benefiting off the backs of all of us is really upsetting. And then knowing that they're getting a free ride, these rich people who own these corporations, when you look at it, it all goes back to that one person at the top, that one family who's benefiting off of all of this. And I think the framework is to hold the corporations accountable. And, we talk a lot about recycling. We talk a lot about, being extremely careful about how much money you spend. I think things need to go back. Well, not go back, but I think people just need to really think clear about, how important is your technology? How important is it for you to have all at the same time, a cell phone, an iPad, a laptop, a desktop? You could have one and survive. You're going to be okay. But we're in a very crazy consumerism frenzy where every year, the phones are updating, and there's that demand for more and more. And our government needs to put a hold on that and say, look, stop. If you're going to create a cell phone, it's got to last. I mean, I really miss my brick. That was just an easy phone. We just used that and no problem. Now we have these fancy little phones, and I can't even find a flip phone or an easy phone to use. We have no landlines, so it really just stems from just overuse and consumerism. And being here on the reservation, being home, what I really like is that as soon as you step away from your computers and your phone and you go and visit your relatives, nobody has any of that stuff. Not everybody has a laptop. The kids, go to school and they use the computers or whatever phone that they can find. they're sitting out at the park where they can pick up Wi-Fi and get a little bit of that. So there's no need for that excessiveness. I mean, even I have to admit, what do I do on my fancy cell phone most of the time? I look at TikTok, you know, and so it's really, really up to our government to regulate these things that are being overused, and to, like, you know, Blaine was saying, have those corporations, you know, have them be held accountable and pay. You know, they're getting rich. You know, they complain about welfare. They complain about, you know, people who are taking advantage of the system. These guys are taking extreme advantage of the system on a very, very old law, and it really needs to be amended quickly. It's oh, I can go on for days, you know, and yeah, thank you. So that, you know, that basically is it.
Well, Martina, thank you so much for your response. And I wish you could see our audience, because there's so many of us who are just nodding along, and definitely some commiserative laughs when talking about watching TikTok and on our cell phones. But thank you for sharing that, as well as the incredibly frustrating experience of working with the government and the hypocrisy and the double standards that they are forcing tribes to work through, and hoops to jump through. We've got a few minutes. I would like to kick it off to Blaine, to our final question. What are some viable solutions to source minerals that don't continue to harm Indigenous communities and sacred sites?
Thanks, Yasmin. Yeah, so I'll just say, I mean, this entire story that Martina is sharing, right, is this one example of why we need to reduce the demand for new minerals. And I don't mean by that we should slow down electrification or slow down our fight against climate change. That is absolutely essential, and we need to fight in every single way we can. But we also have to make sure we prioritize not sacrificing a new set of communities. We can't move from sacrificing oil and gas communities to sacrificing mining communities. That we have to change our system, exactly as Martina is talking about. And there are a number of very straightforward ways to do that will encourage and allow us to electrify our economy, to electrify our system and decarbonize. So circular economy is what sort of the bucket this falls under. And by that, I mean things like recycling. We recycle almost none of our EV batteries, as an example. We have to create a system where that is incentivized, where collection of that is created. We are woefully behind other places like the European Union, where they have actually require new EV batteries to include a high percentage of recycled minerals in their batteries. We have to do that here to create that system and to make sure that what we're using doesn't have to be newly extracted from the ground. But recycling isn't the only way. Reuse, right? Most, as an example, EV batteries are not workable in cars anymore after they're about 70 to 80%. They can't charge more than 70 to 80%. But they're still usable. You can use them, for example, to store energy from a solar panel in a community solar garden and those sorts of things. So second life. But also we have to think about efficiency. So for example, actually a smaller battery that lasts longer uses less minerals and will need less minerals to be extracted from the ground, because it lasts that many more years for a new one. This is exactly what Martina talking about. If you get a new phone every year, then you will be using more lithium every year, as opposed to one that lasts 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And then the last one is innovation. We have to put money not into just recreating this exact system of single occupancy vehicle batteries in the exact same way. We have to innovate for things like public transit on one side, but also to innovate to have other chemistries for batteries, just as an example, or other solar panel chemistries. There is, as an example, Tesla that he's going to use half of their batteries don't have cobalt in them as of the end of last year. So cobalt is just one of the minerals that we're talking about here. But there's ways, if we actually invest in these, that we can change the chemistries of these renewable energy technologies to use less or use none of certain minerals. And so instead of just dumping our money into subsidizing a mining industry and doing the exact same way we've been doing it forever, let's innovate. Let's put money into new technologies and new research to find better ways to do this with better batteries and solar panels and wind turbines that use less lithium or use less copper or use less cobalt and those sorts of things. So there's a whole slew of things that we can do to reduce the demand of these minerals. And it's not going to be a silver bullet that immediately is going to say you get rid of all need for all minerals, but we have to start now. And as these EVs start to ramp up more and more, we'll be able to recycle more and more and thus reduce the demand more and more. But I'll leave it there because I know we're short on time.
Thank you so much, Blaine, and here. And before we kind of close the questions that we've prepared and open it up to questions from our in-person audience, I'd love to ask our panelists, do any of you have any final thoughts or a key takeaway that you'd like to leave us with? You all have had some pretty powerful nuggets dropped on us so far, so I respect that. All right, well, I'll just remind our folks in our audience that if any of you would like to join the fight to protect Indigenous sites, you can text the word protect to 43428 to sign up for our action alert. All righty, well, why don't we open it up to questions from you all? Do any of you have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand and then I will repeat your question back into the microphone for our panelists. Also sourcing questions from our Zoom audience as well. If any of you have questions, please feel free to add it to the chat. Yes.
For Martina, this session focuses a lot on how to resist with policy reform, but for the tribes, what other ways do they resist the mining corporations that we can be inspired by?
Excellent question. Thank you. This question is for Martina. We've talked a lot about how we can use policy and legislation for mining reform for Indigenous communities, but there's someone asking, what other techniques are there to kind of resist some of these mining operations that we can be inspired by and perhaps replicate?
I'm finding, and I'm learning that for us, for our tribe, we just have to also educate ourselves that we do have a voice and that we can actually stand up for ourselves. For example, the copper mine just below Wikia in Baghdad, Arizona, they're very sneaky to where they hire a tribal person who comes in and offers our tribe money for, buildings and projects and such. And as a tribal member coming in, and we already have our corporation for tourism, I think just standing up and just saying, no, we don't want your money, just step off, it's not, we don't need that. But for the lithium mine coming in or the lithium drilling, doing exactly what we've been doing, just standing strong. And what we are wanting to do and what we are trying to do is that, as we mentioned before, the 1872 mining law allows people to come in and do some exploratory drilling on less than 5 acres. And working directly with the BLM, and working on an MOA with them to let them know that whenever they get a notice that they tell us immediately and that we know ahead of time and that we are consulted on that, because for someone to put a notice in, there's no consultation. They don't have to contact the tribes. They don't have to do an EA. They don't have to do anything. They can just go in there with their shovels or pickaxes, whatever they have, their drilling machines, and just go to work. And that needs to be halted. So, you know, being in direct contact with the BLM or the Forest Service, making them held accountable and putting an MOA together, you know, and it's an agreement, not an understanding, because there's a difference between an MOA and an MOU. You know, the understanding is when you're already working together and these are the things you understand you're doing together. But an agreement has a little bit more teeth, where you agreed to tell us that there was a notice put in. And, you know, when we found out that mining, our drilling companies can go in with a notice, we were under the impression that the notices were like a permit and that they were getting permission. Well, they're not. They're just a piece of paper that they can fill out and say, by the way, I'm going to go and drill over here. And they hand it over to the BLM and to the land office. And then they go and do their thing. So no one is actually getting any permission to do that. So just really knowing and understanding and asking direct questions, even if you feel like, you know, they sound dumb, just asking and asking. But the main thing is making them accountable and making sure that those notices are shared with you all the time, and having that direct contact with the field office is a really good beginning and a good start. And really putting the fire underneath the mining companies, because we get their representatives that come around in their little suits and say, oh, you know, we can give you money. So they're like the snake oil guys that come in and try to schmooze us. So making sure that, you know, they are reporting to one person, because they will go around and talk to other people. And they've done that. They've done that where they've grabbed a few other people and taken them and said, well, this so-and-so said this from the Hualapai Tribe. And you're like, no, you know. So making sure that we do have our ordinances and things laid down that they can't do that. So just really making sure that they're not, you know, maneuvering their way in. And that's something that, you know, I was not aware of until I ended up in a meeting with them and got after them and gave them what for, and reported directly to the chairman and said, I didn't know this was happening, and they need to report to you guys. And one thing I do repeat all the time to them is that I'm not at liberty to give you any information. You have to talk to the council and to our tribal leadership, and before you can even get any kind of authorization or information from me. So those are the two things that I think are a good beginning to a framework, but also just being extremely proactive when it comes to understanding you know, the mining law, and knowing who the corporations coming around. And we're pretty lucky that in the area that we're dealing with, we have a caretaker who stays out there near the spring, or at the spring, taking care of that property. And he's been super like an eagle, keeping an eye on everybody. And he'll call right away and just say, you know, I saw another truck out here. So we take those reports seriously. So that's, you know, something that we do. And unfortunately, you know, it's almost like we have to police these people, but it's, you know, it's come down to that.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, Blaine,
Yes, I mean, yeah, if I could just jump in, I 100% agree with everything that Martina is saying. I just wanted to add two quick thoughts. One is, in addition to sort of getting ahead with things like MOAs and legal action potentially and those sorts of things, it's also community organizing. You know, I've seen just the mine that you all are worried about there around the film festival area. It's getting local officials, federal officials, all those sorts of things on your side. And the way that that happens is through strong, vast community organizing on the ground. You know, mining companies have a lot of power because of the law and because of the money. And often the only way that oftentimes that these are actually stopped outside of the courts is they lose their social license to operate. And that can happen in multiple ways, but community organizing is the most sort of effective way. And there's obviously a lot of pieces to community organizing. But the other related thing I want to just say quickly about sort of social license to operate is in the context of these clean energy, the uses of clean energy, for example, automakers, GM and Ford are sort of this fight, as an example of fight to get at the most EV vehicles out as much as they can. And they are signing agreements with mining companies and mines to source those materials. So it's not just the mining companies that has to be held accountable and have to be put under pressure on the social license to operate. It's also the end users who are purchasing them. So, you know, this is lots of different folks, but let's just stick with the automakers. If, for example, Ford and GM really hear of a groundswell of opposition to choosing mines that are in the wrong place, that are in a special or sacred place and shouldn't be investing in those, they will be able to force the mining companies to make different decisions, to actually consult and work with Indigenous peoples on the ground, and to choose a place that is actually and force the mine companies to actually act more sustainably with higher engineering standards and cleanup standards and those sorts of things. So the social license to operate applies to both mining companies and the end users like automakers or solar panel makers and those sorts of things.
Thank you, Blaine. And we saw a lot of nods when you were speaking about community activism. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the theme of this year's film festival is community. We've got time for about one more question from the audience. Yes, go for it.
What's the distinction between oil, gas, and coal versus these other minerals? For example, it seems like the extraction of coal is a mining process. So where is that line drawn?
Great question from the audience. What's the difference in terms of extraction of oil, gas, and coal, specifically like mining for coal versus mining for some of the minerals that will be really useful for the energy transition?
I'll just quickly jump in and say that one of the main differences is oil and gas and coal are under a leasing system. So coal is not considered a hard rock mineral. Under the hard rock law, which is the 1872 law we're talking about, it is a claim system. Literally go and put a stake a claim in the ground and they get those minerals. Oil and gas and coal are done via a leasing system, which again gives more discretion to land managers like BLM and Forest Service to choose where's an appropriate place and less appropriate place, and it puts takes the power away from the corporation as much. Not saying it's perfect. Obviously, there are places we don't think they should be, you know, drilling oil and gas or doing coal mining. Not saying that, but it is at least it's a more equitable system about giving that discretion to the land managers. The other main difference is there is both a reclamation fee and a royalty that is levied on oil and gas and coal companies. And both of those things mean that the cleanup is usually done much more quickly and effectively, and that they actually pay their fair share. None of those things happen in the hard rock mining industry.
Thank you, Blaine. I see a couple more questions. We can sneak one more in. I think I saw this gentleman first.
The 1920 Leasing Act was enacted, but unfortunately, by that time, before 1920, even oil and gas and coal were locatable. So the big oil companies, fledgling at that time, got their big start, particularly like down in Southern California, Long Beach Reservoir, made huge profits that those fields are still active today. And for the US is the only country really in the world that has no royalty on minerals. So, you know, it's like, okay. But that's really important that until 1920, everything was locatable as was mentioned, and that's what really gave these giant management corporations their start.
Yeah, great point here from the audience about how 1920s, similar thing with the oil and gas industry, and how the US is one of the only countries that doesn't require the mining royalties. I think that's our time for today. I'm sorry for the folks that we didn't get to answer your questions. I'll just remind folks that we have an activist booth at the, well, we've got some materials for you right outside the door if you'd like to pick those up on your way out. We have a booth where you can sign up to learn more information, as well as sign some petitions in the Miners Foundry. And then in the National Exchange Hotel, we've got a similar setup. Thank you so much to our panelists here today and to our in-person audience and folks on Zoom for attending. And special thanks to the Wild Scenic Film Festival for having us. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.